The hospital parking garage smelled like disinfectant and exhaust fumes, a scent that clung to my scrubs after 16 hours of hell. My legs trembled with exhaustion, and all I wanted was to crawl into bed and pretend I hadn't watched Mrs. Patterson take her last breath, while her family screamed at me like I could resurrect the dead. The dim overhead lights cast long shadows as I approached my ancient Toyota Corolla, my hands shaking as I dug for my keys. Then I saw him. Before we begin, I spent weeks crafting this story for you. All I ask is 2 seconds of your time. Hit that subscribe button. If this story moves you, and it will, you'll want to know what I create next. Don't let this be the last emotional journey we take together. A man leaning against a black Mercedes, arms crossed, completely blocking the narrow exit lane. He wasn't just near my path, he was deliberately, arrogantly planted in the only way out, like the garage existed for his convenience. His car gleamed under the sickly fluorescent light, all sharp lines and obvious wealth, the kind of vehicle that cost more than I'd make in 5 years. "Are you serious right now?" I said, my voice cracking with fatigue and fury. I'd missed Joshua's 16th birthday. 16! I'd promised him I'd be there to blow out the candles, and instead I'd been elbow deep in someone else's tragedy. My phone had 17 missed calls. The cake I'd scraped together money for was probably melting on the counter. The man didn't move, didn't even acknowledge me. He was looking at his phone, thumb scrolling with infuriating casualness. I honked, once, twice, 3 times, each blast echoing off the concrete walls like accusations. Nothing. That's when something inside me shattered. Maybe it was the patient I'd lost. Maybe it was the attending physician who'd blamed me for not catching symptoms I'd reported 3 times. Maybe it was Joshua's disappointed voice on my voicemail, trying to sound like he understood, like it didn't hurt. Maybe it was just 3 years of swallowing every indignity, every slight, every moment I'd been treated like furniture in scrubs. I was so tired of being invisible. I threw my car into park and got out, my sneakers squeaking against the oil-stained concrete. "Hey!" I shouted, marching toward him. "I don't know who you think you are, but you're blocking the only exit. Some of us have actual lives to get back to." He looked up slowly, and that's when I saw his face. God, that face was a warning I didn't know how to read. Sharp cheekbones that could cut glass, a jaw that belonged in marble, and a neck tattoo that crept up from his collar like smoke, intricate, dark, deliberate. His suit was immaculate, charcoal gray that probably cost more than my student loans. Everything about him screamed money, but it was the wrong kind of money, the kind that didn't come from boardrooms and handshakes. But it was his eyes that should have stopped me. Dark, completely unreadable, cold in a way that had nothing to do with temperature. They fixed on me with the kind of focus a predator gives prey, not angry, just assessing, calculating, like he was deciding something important, and I was too stupid to realize my life hung in the balance. "You're in my way," I said, hating how my voice wavered. My hands were clenched into fists at my sides, nails digging into my palms. "Move, please." His head tilted slightly, like I was a fascinating specimen he'd discovered. Behind him, I suddenly noticed movement. 2 more men materialized from the shadows near the stairwell, both built like linebackers, both wearing dark suits with bulges under their jackets that made my stomach drop, both wearing blank expressions of people who'd seen violence and felt nothing.
"Marco," the tattooed man said, his voice low and accented, something European, Spanish maybe, with gravel underneath. "Elias, give us a moment." The 2 men exchanged glances but didn't move far, just far enough to pretend I had privacy. One of them, the one with a scar bisecting his eyebrow, kept his hand near his jacket, near what had to be a weapon. Oh God, oh God. My survival instinct finally kicked in, screaming at me to apologize, to run, to do anything except stand there challenging a man who traveled with armed guards. But I'd already gone too far, and something about the way he was looking at me, not angry but curious, almost amused, made me dig in my heels. "I've been working for 16 hours, I said, my voice barely steady. "I missed my brother's birthday. I am exhausted, I am heartbroken, and I really, really need you to move." Something shifted in his expression. His eyes narrowed, but not with anger, with interest. He pushed off the Mercedes with a fluid grace that made my breath catch, closing the distance between us in 3 measured steps. He was tall, easily 6'3", and suddenly I was very aware of how alone we were, how empty this level of the garage was at midnight. "What's your name?" he asked. That's not," I stammered, taking a step back. My spine hit my car, trapped. "Why does that matter? Just move your car." "Your name," he repeated, softer this time, but somehow more commanding, like he was used to asking once and never twice. "Tiffany," I whispered, hating myself for answering. "Tiffany Brooks. Now will you please—" "Tiffany," he said it, slowly, tasting each syllable like expensive wine. A slight smile curved his lips, but it didn't reach his eyes. "You've had a long day." "Yes." "You lost someone tonight." My blood turned to ice. How did you—" "I know that look." He gestured vaguely at my face. "I know it well." Before I could process that deeply unsettling statement, he stepped aside and gestured to the exit with an elegant sweep of his hand. "Go home to your brother, Tiffany Brooks. Tell him happy birthday from a stranger." I didn't wait for him to change his mind. I practically threw myself into my car, hands shaking so hard I could barely get the key in the ignition. As I peeled out, I glanced in the rearview mirror. He was standing exactly where I'd left him, watching my car disappear, hands in his pockets. The 2 guards had returned to flank him like sentries, and even from that distance, even through the darkness and distance, I could feel his eyes on me. I could feel him memorizing me. It wasn't until I was 10 blocks away, hands still trembling on the steering wheel, that I realized he'd never actually apologized. He'd moved because he wanted to, because something about our encounter had interested him, and that, I would learn far too late, was so much worse than if he'd just been rude. I'd gotten his attention, and men like Rodrigo Castillo never, ever let go of what captured their interest. What I didn't know that night as I drove home through empty streets with my heart still racing was that Rodrigo had already decided. In that parking garage, in those few charged moments, he'd seen something in me he hadn't seen in 15 years of ruling his empire through fear and violence. Someone who looked him in the eye and saw just a man, not a monster, not a myth, just an obstacle between her and home. He'd spent his entire adult life being feared, and I'd treated him like he was nothing. That night, I became his most dangerous obsession, and he became my most beautiful nightmare. I didn't sleep that night. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw him, the way he'd looked at me like a puzzle he intended to solve, the cold calculation in his dark eyes, the way his guards had appeared from nowhere like shadows given form. I kept telling myself it was nothing, just some rich asshole who thought he owned the world. By morning, I'd almost convinced myself I'd imagined the danger. Joshua was still asleep when I left for my shift, the birthday cake I'd bought him sitting half-eaten on our tiny kitchen counter. I'd gotten home at 1 a.m. to find him passed out on the couch, party hat still on his head, a note that said, "It's okay, Tiff, I know you tried." The guilt sat in my chest like a stone. The hospital was chaos as always, codes blaring, families crying, doctors barking orders. I moved through it mechanically, checking vitals, changing IVs, holding the hand of a woman whose husband was coding in the ER. I was good at this, at being present for everyone else's worst moments. It was my own life I couldn't seem to hold together. I was restocking supplies in the 3rd-floor corridor when I felt it, that prickling sensation on the back of your neck that means someone's watching. I turned, and my breath caught in my throat. He was standing near the elevator, hands in the pockets of another immaculate suit, this one navy blue, that made his olive skin look like it had been kissed by Mediterranean sun. The neck tattoo was partially visible above his collar, what looked like a rose wrapped in thorns, the kind of ink that told stories you didn't want to hear. He wasn't looking at the directory or checking his phone. He was looking directly at me, and there was recognition in his eyes that made my stomach flip. This wasn't a coincidence. This was deliberate. Tiffany. He said my name, like we were old friends, like he hadn't terrified me 12 hours ago. He moved toward me with that same predatory grace, and I instinctively stepped back, my cart of supplies rattling. "What are you doing here?" My voice came out smaller than I wanted, barely above a whisper. "Visiting someone." His accent wrapped around the words like silk hiding razors. "One of my associates had an unfortunate accident." An accident. The way he said it made me think there were no accidents in his world, only consequences and carefully orchestrated violence. "I need to get back to work," I managed, gripping my cart like it could protect me. Around us, the normal hospital chaos continued, nurses rushing past, monitors beeping, overhead pages calling doctors to various wings. No one was paying attention to us. No one saw the danger I was standing in. "Did your brother enjoy his birthday?" Rodrigo asked, and my blood turned to ice. How did you—" "I pay attention," he said simply, like stalking strangers was a perfectly normal hobby. "You interest me, Tiffany Brooks. That doesn't happen often." "I don't want you to interest me," I said, finding my voice. "I want you to leave me alone." "Do you?" He tilted his head, studying me with that same unsettling intensity. "Because last night you could have driven away the moment I moved, but you kept looking in your rearview mirror. You kept watching me watch you." He was right. God help me, he was right. I should have called security, should have reported him, should have done anything except stand there while he dismantled every defense I'd spent years building. But I was drowning in medical debt, working myself to death, and here was a man who looked at me like I mattered. Like I was more than just invisible hands changing bedpans and checking vitals. That's how monsters catch you. Not with chains, but with the promise that someone finally sees you. What happens when Tiffany discovers just how deep Rodrigo's obsession runs? Subscribe so you don't miss what comes next, because the danger is only beginning, and walking away might already be impossible. 3 days passed, and I didn't see him again. I started to breathe easier, convinced myself it had been a strange blip, nothing more. Maybe he really had just been visiting someone. Maybe I'd read too much into a chance encounter. Maybe I was so starved for attention that I'd manufactured danger out of a rich man's mild curiosity. I should have known better. It was Thursday afternoon, the kind of slow shift where time crawls and you count down minutes until you can leave. I was coming back from my break, coffee in hand, when I saw him in the main lobby. He was sitting in one of those uncomfortable plastic chairs like it was a throne, legs crossed, reading a newspaper, an actual physical newspaper, like some kind of anachronism. He looked completely at ease, like he belonged there, like hospitals were his natural habitat. But it was the way he was dressed that made my steps falter. The suits from before had screamed wealth and danger in equal measure. Today, he wore dark jeans, a black Henley that hugged his frame in ways that should be illegal, and a leather jacket that probably cost more than my car. He looked younger like this, less like a crime boss, and more like some dangerous fantasy I shouldn't be having. He glanced up as I approached, and I watched recognition flicker across his face, followed by something darker, something that made my pulse quicken. He folded the newspaper with deliberate precision and stood. "Tiffany." My name in his mouth still sounded like a possession. "Were you hoping I'd see you?" "Were you?" It wasn't a question. I kept walking, heading toward the elevator bank, praying he wouldn't follow. He did. "Your shift ends at 6 today," he said conversationally, matching my pace. "You usually take the bus on Thursdays because Joshua has your car for his after-school program." I stopped so abruptly a doctor nearly ran into me. I turned to face Rodrigo, my coffee trembling in my hand. "How do you know that? How do you know any of that?"
"I told you," he said, stepping closer. "I pay attention." "That's not attention, that's surveillance." My voice was rising, drawing glances from passing visitors. "That's stalking. I could report you. I could—" "Could what?" He didn't sound threatened, just genuinely curious. "Call the police? Tell them what, exactly? That a man keeps showing up in public places? That I haven't touched you, haven't threatened you, haven't done anything except exist in your vicinity?" He was right, and we both knew it. He'd been careful, staying just on the right side of legal while making sure I understood how thoroughly he'd invaded my life. "What do you want from me?" I asked, hating how my voice cracked. Something shifted in his expression, a crack in that careful mask of control. For just a moment he looked almost vulnerable. "I don't know yet," he said quietly, "but I'm going to find out." A woman's voice cut through the tension. "Mr. Castillo?" A nurse I recognized from the ICU appeared, clipboard in hand. "Your associate is awake. He's asking for you." Castillo. I watched as Rodrigo nodded to the nurse, then turned back to me. The vulnerability was gone, replaced with that dangerous stillness I was beginning to recognize as his default. "I have to go, but Tiffany, that bus route you take, the one that goes through Fletcher Street?" He leaned in close enough that I could smell his cologne, cedar and smoke and something darker. "It's not safe at night. A woman was attacked there last week." "How do you—" "Take a cab. I'll have one waiting for you at 6. He pressed something into my hand, cash, at least $200, and walked away before I could refuse. I stood there frozen, watching him disappear into the elevator with the nurse. His name echoed in my head. Castillo. Why did that sound familiar? I pulled out my phone with shaking hands and typed Rodrigo Castillo. The results loaded, and the world tilted sideways. Alleged crime boss, linked to organized crime syndicate, under investigation for racketeering, money laundering. I scrolled further, my coffee forgotten, now cold in my other hand. Suspect involvement in multiple homicides, known for his ruthlessness and... There was a photo, him leaving a courthouse, surrounded by lawyers, looking dangerous and untouchable. The same face that had just stood inches from me, smelling like expensive cologne and promises I couldn't afford to believe. The man who knew where I worked, where I lived, where Joshua went to school, who had just handed me $200 like it was nothing, that man was a monster. And somehow, impossibly, I'd caught his attention. I made it to the bathroom before I threw up, the coffee burning my throat on the way back up. When I looked at myself in the mirror, I barely recognized the woman staring back, eyes too wide, skin too pale, fear written across every feature. The cash was still clutched in my fist, crumpled and damp with sweat. At 6 o'clock, there was a taxi waiting outside the employee entrance. The driver had my name. The fare was already paid. I should have walked to the bus, should have thrown his money away, should have done anything except get into that cab and let Rodrigo Castillo prove that he could take care of me better than I could take care of myself. But Joshua was waiting for the car. I had $3 in my account until payday, and the man who terrified me had just saved me an hour-long bus route through streets that really weren't safe. That's how it starts, not with chains, but with small kindnesses from dangerous hands, with the suffocating relief of someone else carrying burdens you've been carrying alone for too long. The taxi driver knew exactly where I lived. He didn't need the address. What else has Rodrigo learned about my life? And more terrifying, what will he do with that knowledge? Subscribe to find out how deep this obsession goes, because I'm starting to realize I might already be too far in to escape. The eviction notice had been taped to my door for 3 days, a bright orange reminder that I was failing at the one thing that mattered, keeping a roof over Joshua's head. Our landlord, Mr. Okafa, was a bastard on his best days, the kind of man who'd evict a family 2 days before Christmas and sleep like a baby. He'd made it clear, pay the 2 months back rent by Friday or we were out. I had $400. I needed $3,000. I'd been picking up every overtime shift I could, but Joshua needed new shoes, the electricity bill was overdue, and Mom's final medical bills from her final months kept arriving like ghosts I couldn't exorcise. I'd been rationing meals, skipping lunch, telling Joshua I'd already eaten when he asked why I wasn't joining him for dinner. Friday morning, I was dragging myself up the stairs to our apartment, already rehearsing the conversation I'd have with Joshua about maybe staying with his friend's family for a while, when I heard voices. Mr. Okafa was standing in the hallway outside our door, and he wasn't alone. The man with him was tall, broad-shouldered, wearing a suit that made Mr. Okafa's cheap polyester look like a costume. I recognized the build, the posture, the way he stood like violence was always an option. One of Rodrigo's men. I'd seen him in the hospital parking garage that first night, Marco, the one with the scar. My stomach dropped. "Ms. Brooks," Mr. Okafa said, and his voice was different, higher, nervous. He was holding the eviction notice, and as I watched, he tore it in half, then quarters, then into pieces so small they looked like orange confetti. "There's been a misunderstanding about the rent." "What?" The word barely made it past my lips. "You're paid up," he said quickly, not meeting my eyes. "Through the end of the year, actually. I apologize for the confusion. It won't happen again." Marco said nothing, just stood there, radiating menace. His eyes met mine for a moment, no threat in his gaze, but no warmth either, just acknowledgement. Then he nodded once and followed Mr. Okafa down the stairs. I stood there frozen, in the hallway, pieces of torn notice scattered at my feet like evidence of a crime I hadn't committed but was somehow complicit in. Rodrigo, it had to be Rodrigo. Inside the apartment, I pulled out every bill I'd been avoiding, the electricity company suddenly showing a zero balance, the credit card I'd maxed out on Mom's medications, paid in full, a note saying account closed at customer's request, even though I'd never requested anything. And then, at the bottom of the pile, the hospital billing statement I'd been too terrified to open. My hands shook as I tore the envelope. Mom's final hospital stay had cost $147,000. Insurance had covered some, but I'd been making $100 monthly payments on the remaining $60,000 for 2 years. The interest alone was drowning me. The balance read $0. Paid in full by third party. Account settled. I couldn't breathe. The papers slipped from my hands, scattering across our worn carpet. He'd done this. Rodrigo Castillo had reached into my life with his blood-stained hands and erased my debts like they were nothing, like $60,000 was pocket change, like he had the right to buy me piece by piece. My phone buzzed. Unknown number. "You were drowning. I threw you a lifeline. Don't overthink it. R." I typed back with shaking fingers. "I didn't ask for this." His response came immediately. "You didn't have to. I can't accept this. It's too much." 3 dots appeared, disappeared, appeared again. Finally, "It's already done, but if it makes you feel better, you can pay me back." How? The dots took longer this time, and when his message appeared, I felt something cold slide down my spine. "Dinner, tomorrow night, 8 p.m. I'll send a car." I stared at the message, my heart hammering against my ribs. This was the price. This was always going to be the price. He bought my debts, my landlord's cooperation, my sense of safety, and now he was collecting. And if I say no? His response was immediate, and somehow worse than any threat. Then say no. The debts are still paid, the rent is still covered. I'm not a loan shark, Tiffany. I'm just a man who wants to have dinner with a woman who interests him. That was the cruelest part. He was giving me a choice, making it clear that nothing would be taken back if I refused. But we both knew I wouldn't refuse. How could I? He'd seen my desperation and answered it. He'd lifted burdens I'd been carrying alone for years. The weight of obligations settled over my shoulders like a familiar coat. "What should I wear?" I typed, hating myself. "Something that makes you feel powerful. You'll need it." I looked around our tiny apartment, the peeling paint, the furniture held together with hope and duct tape, the life I'd been barely surviving. Rodrigo had reached into this world and changed it with a snap of his fingers, and now he wanted payment in the form of my time, my attention, my presence at his table. The terrifying part wasn't that he'd bought me, it was that some small, desperate part of me was relieved. Joshua was acting strange. Not bad strange, that would have been easier to handle. This was good strange, which somehow felt worse. He'd been smiling more, doing his homework without my nagging, even cleaned his room without being asked. For a 16-year-old boy who'd spent the last 2 years oscillating between sullen silence and explosive anger, this new version of my brother should have been a relief. Instead, it terrified me. "You're in a good mood," I said carefully, watching him demolish a sandwich at our kitchen table. It was Tuesday, 3 days before the dinner with Rodrigo that I'd been simultaneously dreading and obsessing over. "Something happen at school?" He shrugged, but there was something in his expression, a lightness I hadn't seen since before Mom died. "Just, I don't know, things are better, I guess." "Better how?" "Those guys who were messing with me, they stopped." My hands stilled over the dishes I was washing. "What guys?" Joshua looked up, surprised. "I told you about them. The ones from Jefferson High who kept hassling me for lunch money, said I was in their territory or whatever." He hadn't told me. Or maybe he had, and I'd been too exhausted, too buried in work and bills to really hear him. The guilt twisted in my chest like a knife. "When did they stop?" I asked, keeping my voice casual, even as dread pooled in my stomach. "Like a week ago. I was walking home from Marcus's place, cutting through the park, and they cornered me. There were 4 of them this time. I thought I was done for, but then this guy showed up." My hands were gripping the edge of the sink so hard my knuckles had gone white. "What guy?" "I don't know his name. He was older, like maybe 30s, had these crazy tattoos on his neck, like a rose or something. Anyway, he just walked up and said something to them I couldn't hear. Tiff, I've never seen anyone look that scared. They literally ran, like full-on sprinting away." "No, no, no, no. Did he say anything to you?" My voice sounded strange, distant, like it was underwater. "Did he ask you anything else?" "About you. About us." Joshua tilted his head, confused by my tone. "I mean, he asked what my name was, asked if I lived around here. Oh, and he asked if I had family looking out for me. I told him about you, about how you work at the hospital." His expression shifted, became almost defensive. "Did I do something wrong?" "No, baby, no." I crossed to him, pulled him into a hug even though he was too old for it, even though he squirmed. "You didn't do anything wrong. I just want you to be careful. If you see that man again, I want you to tell me immediately. Okay?" "Okay, weird, but okay." He pulled away, grabbing his backpack. "I'm gonna go do homework. This new mood you're in is freaking me out."
After he left, I stood in the kitchen, staring at nothing, my mind racing. Rodrigo hadn't just paid my bills and intimidated my landlord. He'd found my brother, had followed him or had someone follow him, had identified the threats in Joshua's life and eliminated them with the same casual efficiency he probably used to eliminate any obstacle. He was mapping my entire world, inserting himself into every crack and crevice. And the worst part? He was helping, genuinely helping. Those kids had been terrorizing Joshua for months, and I'd been too busy, too broke, too powerless to do anything about it. Rodrigo had solved it in one conversation. My phone buzzed. Of course it did. "Your brother is safe. Those boys won't bother him again. Neither will anyone else. R." I typed back, "You had no right." "I had every right. He's important to you. That makes him important to me. He's a child. Leave him out of this. This isn't about him, Tiffany. It's about you. Everything I do is about you." The phone slipped from my shaking hands. He wasn't just watching me anymore. He was building a web around me, and every strand was made of things I desperately needed. Safety, security, protection. He was making himself indispensable, making it impossible to push him away without losing everything he'd given. And Joshua, my baby brother, the only family I had left, was now part of that web whether I liked it or not. I thought about those boys who'd been terrorizing Joshua, how they'd disappeared. Rodrigo had said they wouldn't bother him again, but what did that mean? Were they scared? Were they hurt? Were they... I couldn't finish the thought. Another text. "I'll see you Friday. The car will arrive at 7:30. Wear something red." Not a request, a command wrapped in courtesy.
I looked at Joshua's closed bedroom door, heard him laughing at something on his phone, that lightness still there. He was safe now, happy, protected by a monster who'd decided we were his to guard. The cage Rodrigo was building was lined with velvet, but it was still a cage, and I was starting to realize that the lock was already turned. Rodrigo isn't just pursuing Tiffany anymore. He's claiming her entire world piece by piece. But what happens at the dinner where she finally confronts him? And what price will she pay for the protection she never asked for but desperately needs? Subscribe now, because Friday night is coming, and nothing will ever be the same after Tiffany walks through Rodrigo's door. The dress arrived Friday morning in a box so expensive I was afraid to touch it. Deep crimson silk that probably cost more than my monthly salary, with a note in handwriting too elegant to be anything but practiced. Red looks like courage. You'll need yours tonight. R. I should have sent it back, should have texted him that I wasn't coming, that he couldn't buy me with paid bills and designer dresses. Instead, I stood in front of my bathroom mirror at 7 o'clock, barely recognizing the woman staring back. The dress fit perfectly. Of course it did. He'd probably had me measured without my knowledge, and made me look like someone who belonged in his world. I looked like prey dressed for the predator's table. The car arrived at exactly 7:30. Not a taxi this time, but a sleek black town car with Marco at the wheel. He opened the door without a word, and I climbed in because what else was I going to do? Joshua thought I was going to dinner with a friend from work. The lie had tasted like ash in my mouth. The restaurant wasn't a restaurant. Marco pulled up to a building in the financial district, all glass and steel and old money. He led me through a private entrance, up an elevator that required a key card, and down a hallway where my heels clicked against marble that probably cost more per square foot than my entire apartment. The door at the end opened into a private dining room that took my breath away. Floor-to-ceiling windows overlooked the city, lights spread out like scattered diamonds. A single table set for two, candles flickering, and Rodrigo standing by the window, in a black suit that made him look like he'd stepped out of some dangerous fantasy. He turned when I entered, and something flickered across his face. Satisfaction, hunger, something else I couldn't name. Tiffany. He crossed to me, took my hand, pressed his lips to my knuckles in a gesture so old-fashioned that it should have been ridiculous. On him, it felt like a brand. You're stunning. You didn't give me much choice. The words came out sharper than intended, but I was done pretending this was normal. I gave you every choice, he said mildly, releasing my hand. You could have stayed home, could have worn anything you wanted, could have told me to go to hell. He smiled, but it didn't reach his eyes. The fact that you're here, in that dress, tells me everything I need to know. It tells you I can be bought, I said, hating how my voice shook. No, he pulled out my chair, waited for me to sit. It tells you you're practical, that you understand how the world works, that you're willing to sit across from a monster if it means keeping your brother safe and fed. The honesty was worse than any lie would have been. Dinner appeared. I didn't see who brought it. Courses that looked like art and tasted like heaven. Rodrigo talked while I ate, his voice smooth and measured, telling me half-truths I could feel more than see. He talked about his import business, about complicated family dynamics, about growing up in Madrid with a father who taught him that power was the only currency that mattered. I'm not a good man, Tiffany. I won't pretend to be, but I'm honest about what I am. And what are you? I asked, finally meeting his eyes. Lonely, he said simply, and for just a moment the mask cracked. I'm surrounded by people every day, people who fear me, who need me, who would die for me, but no one looks at me like you did in that parking garage, like I was just a man, an inconvenient, irritating man, but still just a man. You're not just a man, I whispered. You're dangerous. Yes. He leaned forward, and I could smell his cologne, cedar and smoke and something darker. But I've never been dangerous to you. I've paid your debts, protected your brother, made your life easier in every way I can. Tell me, Tiffany, what exactly have I done that makes me the monster in this story? The question hung between us like a trap.
Because he's right. Everything he'd done had helped me. The bills, the rent, the boys who terrorized Joshua. He'd solved problems I couldn't solve myself. He'd given me breathing room I hadn't had in years. You didn't ask permission, I said finally. Would you have said yes if I had? He already knew the answer. You would have said no, would have suffered rather than accept help from someone like me. So I didn't ask. I just fixed what was broken. You can't just fix people's lives without their consent.
Can't I? He gestured to the city below us. All those lights, all those lives. I do it every day, Tiffany. I make decisions that affect thousands of people. I move money, resources, power. I protect what's mine and destroy what threatens me. That's what men like me do. I'm not yours, I said, but my voice wavered. Not yet, he agreed, and the promise in those words made my stomach flutter. But you will be, because deep down you're tired of carrying everything alone. You're exhausted from being invisible, from fighting battles you can't win. And I see you, Tiffany. I see how strong you are, how brave, how beautiful. I see everything you've sacrificed, and I'm offering you something you've never had. What's that? Someone to share the weight. He reached across the table, his fingers brushing mine. Let me carry your burdens. Let me protect you and Joshua. Let me give you the life you deserve instead of the one you're surviving. The words were seduction wrapped in truth, and God help me, I wanted to believe them. What do you want in return? I asked. His smile was slow, dangerous, devastating. You, just you, your time, your attention, your presence in my life. I'm not asking you to love me, Tiffany. I'm asking you to let me love you. I couldn't sleep. The dinner had ended with Rodrigo kissing my hand again, Marco driving me home in silence, and me standing in my apartment at midnight feeling like I'd just signed a contract I hadn't fully read. Joshua was asleep, the apartment was quiet, and my mind wouldn't stop replaying Rodrigo's words. Let me love you. Like love was something he could decide to do, something he could control and direct like everything else in his carefully orchestrated world. I sat on my bed, still wearing the red dress because I couldn't bring myself to take it off yet, and opened my laptop. My fingers hovered over the keyboard for a long moment. I'd searched his name once before, seen the basics, alleged crime boss, under investigation, but I'd been too afraid to dig deeper, too willing to pretend I didn't know what I knew. Tonight, I needed the truth. I typed, Rodrigo Castillo, organized crime. The results loaded and my stomach dropped. The first link was a news article from 6 months ago. Castillo Empire expands. Federal investigators probe money laundering operation. I clicked it with shaking hands. There was a photo of Rodrigo leaving a courthouse, flanked by expensive lawyers, his face impassive. The article talked about shell companies, offshore accounts, a network that spanned 3 countries. But it was the next paragraph that made my breath catch. Castillo, 34, has been linked to at least 7 unsolved homicides over the past decade, though prosecutors have been unable to bring charges due to lack of evidence and witness intimidation. Former associates who agreed to testify have either disappeared or recanted their statements. 7 murders, minimum. I clicked another link, then another, each one worse than the last. A blog post from an investigative journalist, The Untouchable, How Rodrigo Castillo Built an Empire on Blood and Terror. It detailed his rise from enforcer to boss, the bodies that paved his way, the families destroyed. There were names, men who'd crossed him and vanished, businesses that refused to pay protection money and burned to the ground, a prosecutor who'd gotten too close and ended up in the hospital with injuries the article delicately called persuasive. I found crime scene photos that someone had leaked, a warehouse, blood on concrete, police tape. The caption said 3 men had been found there, execution style. The primary suspect, Rodrigo Castillo. Evidence, circumstantial. Charges filed, none. My hands were shaking so hard I could barely scroll. There was a forum where people discussed him like he was a myth, a legend. Stories of his brutality, his precision, his absolute intolerance for betrayal. One post detailed how he'd allegedly killed a man with his bare hands for touching something that belonged to him. Another described a restaurant owner who'd refused his protection and watched his daughter get kidnapped, returned 3 days later, unharmed, but traumatized, with a message, "Next time, I won't be merciful." I found a photo gallery from some society event. Rodrigo in a tuxedo, surrounded by politicians and businessmen, all of them smiling like they weren't standing next to a murderer. The caption identified the event as a charity gala. He donated $500,000 to a children's hospital. Blood money. It was all blood money. The last article I found was the worst. An interview with a former FBI agent who'd spent 5 years trying to build a case against Rodrigo. "He's a ghost," said the agent. "Every witness disappears or refuses to talk. Every piece of evidence gets contaminated or lost. He has people in every level of law enforcement, the judiciary, city government. He's not just a criminal. He's a system, and you can't fight a system." I barely made it to the bathroom before I threw up, the expensive dinner Rodrigo had bought me burning my throat on the way back up. I knelt on the cold tile, hugging the toilet, my body shaking with sobs I couldn't control. This was the man who'd paid my mother's medical bills, who'd protected Joshua, who'd looked at me over candlelight and talked about loneliness like it justified everything. 7 murders, at least 7, probably more. Probably dozens more that nobody knew about, bodies that never got found, people who just disappeared into whatever void men like Rodrigo created. And he wanted me, had decided I was his, had woven himself so thoroughly into my life that I couldn't extract him without losing everything, the paid rent, the safety, the protection that kept Joshua alive. I thought about those boys who'd been terrorizing my brother, how they'd disappeared after Rodrigo talked to them. Were they scared? Were they hurt? Were they dead? Buried somewhere where no one would find them, all because they'd pushed around the little brother of a woman who'd caught a monster's attention. My phone buzzed on the bathroom counter. Of course it did. "I hope you made it home safely. Sleep well, Tiffany. I'll be thinking of you. R." The casualness of it, the normalcy, made me want to scream. He was texting me like he was a normal man interested in a normal woman, like he built his empire on corpses and terror, like his hands were stained with blood I couldn't see but now couldn't stop imagining. I should call the police, should tell them everything, the stalking, the intimidation, the way he'd inserted himself into our lives. But even as I thought it, I knew it was useless. Untouchable, the FBI agent's word echoed in my head. He was untouchable, and I was just a broke nursing assistant with a teenage brother who depended on me. What could I possibly do against a man who made prosecutors disappear? I crawled into bed still wearing the red dress he'd bought me, my laptop open beside me, pages and pages of evidence that the man who wanted to love me was a monster in an expensive suit. And the worst part, the part that made me hate myself, was that I still didn't know what I was going to do about it. Because Joshua was safe, our rent was paid, I could breathe for the first time in years, and all it cost was my soul, sold to a devil who kissed my hand and called it devotion. Tiffany knows the truth now, but truth and action are 2 different things. When violence comes for the people she loves, will knowing who Rodrigo really is make any difference? Or has she already fallen too far to climb back out? Subscribe, because what happens next will break your heart and change everything. I didn't hear from Rodrigo for 3 days after the dinner. 3 days of silence that felt like the eye of a hurricane, beautiful and terrifying because I knew the storm was coming. I went to work, came home, avoided Joshua's questions about why I seemed so distracted. I kept my laptop closed, afraid that if I looked at those articles again, I'd lose whatever fragile composure I'd managed to construct. On the 3rd night, I was working a late shift. Joshua texted me at 8, heading to Marcus's. Be back by 10. Love you. I sent back a heart emoji and tried not to think about all the ways Rodrigo had infiltrated our lives, all the invisible strings he'd attached to the people I loved. At 9:47, my phone rang. Unknown number. "Is this Tiffany Brooks?" A man's voice, clipped. "Yes, who?" "This is Officer Chen with Metro PD. Your brother Joshua has been involved in an incident. He's being transported to Mercy General Hospital. You should come immediately." The world stopped. Everything, my heartbeat, my breathing, time itself just stopped. What kind of incident? Is he okay? What happened? "Ma'am, I can't give details over the phone. Please come to the hospital." I don't remember leaving work, don't remember the drive. I just remember running through the ER doors, still in my scrubs, and seeing police everywhere. Too many police. The kind of police presence that meant something terrible, something violent, something that couldn't be undone. "Joshua Brooks," I gasped at the desk. "My brother," they said. "Trauma Bay 3. But miss, you can't." I was already running. I knew this hospital, knew every hallway, every shortcut. I burst through the trauma bay doors and the world tilted sideways. Joshua was on the gurney, his shirt soaked with blood, so much blood that it didn't look real. Paramedics worked over him, their hands moving with practiced efficiency, but I could see it in their faces. This was bad. This was really bad. "Joshua!" I screamed, and hands grabbed me, helped me back. "Ma'am, you need to let us work." "That's my brother. That's my baby brother." I was fighting them, trying to get to him, and then Joshua's eyes found mine. He looked so young, so scared, and his lips moved. "Tiff, I'm here, baby. I'm here," I sobbed. "You're going to be okay. You're going to be fine." "GSW to the abdomen," one of the paramedics was saying. "Possible liver involvement. BP dropping. We need to move now." Gunshot wound. Someone had shot my brother. Someone had shot Joshua. They wheeled him past me towards surgery, and I stood there in the hallway, covered in his blood, my hands, my scrubs, everywhere, shaking so hard I thought I'd fall apart. A detective approached, showing me his badge. "Miss Brooks, I need to ask you some questions. Your brother was caught in crossfire outside your apartment building. Do you know anyone who might—" "Tiffany." That voice, that accent. I turned, and Rodrigo was there, striding down the hallway with Marco and 2 other men flanking him. He looked like he'd aged 10 years since I'd last seen him. His face pale, his eyes wild with something I'd never seen before. Fear. Rodrigo Castillo looked afraid. "Get away from her," he said to the detective, and there was so much command in his voice that the detective actually stepped back. Then Rodrigo was in front of me, his hands on my shoulders, his eyes searching my face. "Are you hurt? Did they touch you?" "Joshua. Someone shot Joshua." Something broke in his expression, something raw and devastating. "I know, and I'm so sorry. This is my fault. This is all my fault." The confession hung between us like smoke. Around us, police were watching, hospital staff were watching, but Rodrigo didn't seem to care. He pulled me against his chest, and I should have pushed him away, should have screamed at him, but I couldn't because I was drowning, and he was the only solid thing in a world that had just shattered. "They were sending me a message," he said into my hair, his voice breaking. "My enemies. They found out about you, about Joshua. They knew the best way to hurt me was to hurt what I—" He pulled back, forced me to look at him. "I never meant for this to happen. I thought I could protect you both. I thought I was being careful." "You?" I shoved him hard, my grief turning to rage. "This happened because of you? Joshua is in surgery because you decided to play savior? Because you couldn't leave us alone?" Yes. No excuses, no justifications, just that one word, heavy with guilt. "Everything you learned about me is true. I'm a monster, Tiffany. I've killed men. I've destroyed lives. I've built an empire on blood and fear. And I brought that world to your doorstep because I was selfish enough to think I could have something good, something pure." Police were moving closer now, but Marco and the others formed a wall. Rodrigo didn't even glance at them. "I love you," he said, and the words sounded like a confession at a funeral. "I know I have no right to say that. I know you hate me, and you should, but I love you, and I will fix this. The men who did this are already dead. Their families are already suffering, and I will make sure nothing like this ever happens again." "Already dead?" I repeated, horror mixing with rage. "You killed them? Just like that?" "Just like that." His eyes were cold now, the fear replaced with something harder. "They touched what's mine. There are consequences for that." "I'm not yours!" I screamed, and my hands were beating against his chest, leaving bloody handprints on his perfect white shirt. "Joshua isn't yours! You don't get to play God with our lives." "You're right," he said quietly, catching my wrists, holding me still. "You're absolutely right. So I'm giving you a choice, Tiffany, the choice I should have given you from the beginning." Behind him, a doctor emerged from the surgical wing. I couldn't read his expression, couldn't tell if the news was good or bad, and my heart stopped beating. Joshua survived. The surgery took 6 hours, and I spent every minute in that waiting room, with Rodrigo sitting 3 chairs away, close enough to be present, but far enough to give me space. His men formed a perimeter around us. I counted 8 of them, all armed, all watching every person who entered or left, making sure no one finished what they'd started. When the doctor finally emerged and said Joshua would recover, I collapsed. Rodrigo caught me before I hit the ground, and I let him because I had nothing left. He carried me to a private room he'd somehow procured, laid me on the couch, and sat on the floor beside me while I cried for an hour straight. "I need to see him," I finally said, my voice hoarse. "Soon. They're moving him to ICU. He's sedated. He won't know you're there yet." Rodrigo's hand found mine in the darkness. "Tiffany, I meant what I said. I'm giving you a choice." "What choice?" I laughed bitterly. "You've already destroyed everything." "No, I'm offering you a way out." He stopped pacing, began pacing, and I could see the toll this had taken on him, the shadows under his eyes, the tension in his shoulders. "I can set you up anywhere in the world. New identities for you and Joshua. A house, money, everything you need to start over. You'll never see me again. You'll be safe, protected by distance and anonymity. My enemies will think you're dead, and you can live the life you were supposed to have before I infected it." "And if I don't want to run?" The question surprised us both. He stopped pacing, turned to face me. "Then you accept what I am. You stay, and I protect you with everything I have. But you'll live in my world, Tiffany. You'll be surrounded by guards, by violence, by the constant threat of what happened to Joshua happening again. You'll be in a cage, even if it's a golden one." "Those are terrible choices." I know, and I hate that I'm the reason you have to make them, but I won't lie to you anymore. I won't pretend this can be normal. You deserve the truth, even if it destroys me." I stood, walked to where he stood by the window, the city lights casting shadows across his face. This man who'd killed for me, who'd woven himself into my life like a virus I couldn't cure. This monster who looked at me like I was salvation. "I have a third option. Anything, name it. Leave the life." The words hung between us like a challenge. "Walk away from your empire. Use your money, your connections, your power to dismantle it from within. Turn evidence over to the FBI. Cooperate. And maybe, when you've spent years undoing the damage you've caused, when you've proven you can be something other than a monster, maybe then we can see if there's anything left worth saving." He stared at me like I'd spoken a language he didn't understand. "You're asking me to destroy everything I've built. I'm asking you to choose." My hands found his face, forced him to look at me. "Your empire or me, your power or your soul, because I can't love a man with blood on his hands. I can't be with someone who solves problems with murder. If you want me, if you really love me like you claim, then prove it. Be better. Be the man you could have been if the world hadn't made you into this." "They'll kill me," he whispered. "The people I've wronged, the families of the men I've killed. The moment I'm not protected by my organization, I'm a dead man." I know. Tears were streaming down my face. And maybe that's what you deserve. Maybe that's the price of redemption. But at least you'll die as a man instead of a monster. Silence stretched between us, heavy with impossible choices. Then, slowly, Rodrigo sank to his knees in front of me. This man who'd never bowed to anyone, who commanded fear and respect with a glance, knelt on the hospital floor like a penitent at confession. "I don't know if I can do this," he said, his voice raw. "I don't know if I'm strong enough to be what you need me to be." "Then we'll find out together." I knelt with him, our foreheads touching. "But Rodrigo, if you choose your empire, if you choose power over redemption, I'm gone. Joshua and I disappear, and you never find me. I'll spend the rest of my life running from you, and you'll spend the rest of yours wondering if you made the right choice." His hands were shaking as they cupped my face. "You're asking me to commit suicide." "I'm asking you to choose life, real life, not the half-existence you've been living, surrounded by people who fear you. I'm offering you something you said you wanted, to be seen as just a man, but you have to actually become one first." Minutes passed. I could see the war in his eyes. Decades of violence and power, warring with something newer, more fragile, hope, maybe, or love, or the desperate wish that he could be something other than the world had made him. Finally, he spoke. "I'll need time. This isn't something I can do overnight. It'll take months, maybe years, and it will be dangerous for both of us." "I know." "And you'll wait while I burn down everything I've built? You'll stay?" "I'll stay," I promised. "But Rodrigo, if you hurt anyone else, if you kill one more person, even to protect yourself, we're done. This only works if you really choose to walk away." He pulled me against him, and I felt his body shake with silent sobs. "You're going to get me killed," he whispered. "Maybe," I agreed. "Or maybe I'm going to save your life. We'll find out." When Marco appeared in the doorway to tell us Joshua was awake, Rodrigo stood and pulled me up with him. But before we left the room, he turned to his second-in-command. "Set up a meeting with my lawyer," he said, "and contact Special Agent Wilson at the FBI. Tell him Rodrigo Castillo wants to make a deal." Marco's face went pale. "Boss, if you do this—" "I know what happens," Rodrigo interrupted. "Do it anyway." Then he took my hand, and together we walked toward the ICU where my brother was waiting. A monster and the woman who'd asked him to become human, both of us stepping into an uncertain future built on hope and blood and the fragile possibility of redemption. 3 years later, Rodrigo Castillo's testimony brought down the largest crime syndicate in the eastern United States. He served 18 months in protective custody before entering witness protection with a new name, a new life, and a nursing assistant who'd seen past the monster to the man who'd been drowning underneath. Joshua graduated high school with honors. Tiffany finished her nursing degree, and Rodrigo learned that the hardest thing he'd ever done wasn't building an empire, it was learning to live as someone who deserved to be loved. Some people say he got off too easy, that 18 months couldn't pay for the lives he'd taken. They're probably right, but redemption isn't about fairness, it's about choice. And for the first time in his life, Rodrigo Castillo chose to be more than the sum of his sins. He chose her. And she chose to believe people can change, even when the world says they can't. Thank you for staying till the end. If this story moved you, subscribe for more tales of love, danger, and the impossible choices that define us.